What's up, guys? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I want to break down what's happening with Tesla spying the overall markets. I'm going to talk about why the market saw this big sell off and what's going to likely happen approaching tomorrow. But just note that I am not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out my Moomoo link. If you deposit $100, you're guaranteed 5 free stocks. If you deposit $2,000, you're guaranteed 30 in total. And the offer ends very soon at the end of March. Anyways, now let's talk about what's happening with this market. So looking at Tesla and the others, as you can see, we got this big red day. Tesla was down over 2%. We were down even more in the morning before we saw some buyers return, but it still closed in the red. Nvidia was down almost 17%, and we saw SPY down over 1.4%, with the QQQ being down almost 3%. So the majority of stocks saw this massive sell-off, and the question is, why did the market sell off like this, and what's going to likely happen in the future? I just want to mention that in my videos, I was bullish on the market approaching Friday of last week, and starting on Friday, I gave you guys a pullback warning. I mentioned that there was likely going to be a buying opportunity coming. I was expecting some downside in the markets, and since Friday, I made that video. You guys could go back to my videos to check it just for verification. And we called this move. We saw Tesla sell off, and so did the broader markets. Now, I don't post this to brag or anything. I just want to say that for those who question whether or not my videos are legit or if I am correct with predictions, let me just say that I am right most of the time, and not always, but most of the time I do make correct predictions, and I do have a record that shows that in case you guys want to look back at my videos. Just here to give you guys more confidence in who you're listening to, and for other reasons like that. But anyways, going back, why did the market sell off the way it did? What's going on? Looking back, you guys could tell that Google's in the red, Microsoft is in the red, Nvda absolutely dumped, whereas finance and health technology were more in the green. So just keep that in mind. What happened today? We got this big news that came out. There was this news about how DeepSeek, which happens to be an AI startup company in China, they developed different AI models, especially their R1 got very popular. This is going to be a very, very big competitor of ChatGPT. And this led to a lot of controversy because of the fact that they claim that for under $6 million, they built this AI that is very competitive with American ones. Now, that is very important because it leads to a lot of questions about the legitimacy and the dominance of American AIs, and whether it makes sense for us to be spending billions on this with the billions invested. Because they claim for under $6 million, they built one that's just as sophisticated. Now, the thing about this is you need a lot more context. So as time went on, we got more context about this, and we saw a very important AI chief scientist come out who described what's really going on. So basically, for the people out there who are saying China is surpassing the US in AI, that's not entirely the truth from the way you look at this. Okay. What basically happened was we have open source models that are surpassing the proprietary ones, excuse me. DeepSeek has profited from open research and open source. That includes Llama from Meta and many others like that. And they came up with new ideas, of course, but they did that by building on top of other people's work. Once again, this is all open sourced models that they used. So because the work is published in open source, everyone can profit from it. So that's what's essentially going on. So I want to say this, the engineers, the developers, they did a very, very awesome job at developing this AI. You have to give them credit where it's due. But then you also have to note that we don't know the true costs. We don't know if it truly cost under $6 million and how many chips were really involved in doing this. And then you also have to consider that this was not built completely from scratch. They used AI models from that were actually openly sourced from these other tech companies. So just to be very, very clear, you have to give credit where it's due, right? You have to give credit to Meta and the others that helped develop the open source AIs that helped make this what it is. And simultaneously, they did do a good job at building this, but we don't have enough details for me to truly say that it cost much less. We don't know what the true costs were and other factors like that. But I just want to say that this did lead to a lot of fear nonetheless. They did do a good job at building it, and you have to consider that this does lead to some questions about how much is being funded into this AI world and whether or not it's too much funding or etc. But if anything, you guys can see that we saw Nvidia lose about $600 billion in market valuation. You could argue that that's a little bit exaggerated. You may say the exact opposite, but it does lead to some questions about whether or not the US is truly going to be the most dominant country when it comes to developing AI, or if there's going to be even more competition than anticipated from like China and other countries like that. So that's the main thing that's going on right now. I would argue that the move has been, much of this has been priced in, and the market's due for a small bounce after so much downside. So that's like what my view happens to be. As far as Tesla goes, it's taking the EU to court over its tariffs on EVs imported from China. That's some interesting news that's come out. Tariffs are part of the EU's ongoing efforts to combat what it sees as an unfair trade. And they're essentially doing this because of some probes that's come out. The EU has introduced steep anti-subsidy tariffs in late October of 2024, hitting Tesla by a 7.8% rate. That is a little bit lower than what the other manufacturers have to go through, but this could be part of why we're seeing some sales decline. They're doing this because of competition, because of the fact that EVs are a lot cheaper in China. So Tesla's trying to get that advantage. We'll see what happens with the courts thus far. I think Tesla's sales are going to be fine in China, in the US, and even parts of Europe, regardless of what happens. But I hope that they do come to a consensus as time goes on. Now, for other pieces of news, just know that tomorrow is going to be Tuesday, January 28th at 10 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have the Richmond Fed manufacturing numbers. May cause some volatility here and there, but it's quite minor. And on Wednesdays, when we have FOMC, which Jerome Powell giving a speech and giving us more insights about interest rates. Right now, there's about a 96.8% chance the Fed keeps rates the same, so we'll see if that continues. And when it comes to other factors, just know this. As far as the market's going to continue on Tuesday, we have Boeing, GM, Starbucks, and SAP announcing earnings tomorrow. On Wednesday, we have Tesla announcing earnings alongside Meta, Microsoft, and other big tech stocks. And then we have Apple announcing earnings on Thursday. So on Wednesday, we have FOMC and Tesla's going to be announcing earnings after market close. This will affect a lot of share prices on Thursday. On Thursday, we have Apple and others announcing their earnings after market close. So this could also lead to more volatility on Friday. And then that's pretty much it. So Wednesday through Friday is going to be pretty crazy. But tomorrow is going to be a little bit more quiet as we have more minor earnings. Now, keep in mind, the fear ingredient index is currently at fear. We'll see if this fear continues tomorrow. Momentum is at fear, and we're also starting to see the put to call option ratio bouncing a little bit as more puts are being bought. I said yesterday this was at the extreme, so we did expect this to have a nice reaction, and that's what the market ended up doing. So what do I see from this point on? Let me call out something very important, okay? As far as Tesla goes, we're trying to base at the support, and we have earnings as the next major catalyst to cause a much larger move. So we'll see if we get a bounce or not. On SPY has this big gap above to fill if we do break resistance. The QQQ also has this gap above to fill if we do end up breaking resistance as well. But at the same time, please note that the VIX also has a gap below if we lose support. So just keep those in mind at least as time goes on. So what do I see for Tesla? What is my prediction? What do I think is going to pan out for the chart? It's very simple. Tesla has this resistance at 400. If we break this, we're looking for an attempt to get back up towards like 405 and eventually the 408s. And if we lose support down here, we're looking for this to essentially lose 390. If that fails us, we're looking for a dip to about 383 or below. So watch these levels very, very closely. I think there's a good chance we try to break past 400 to start pushing even more. Then we'll just have to see what happens at least from this point on. For other factors out there, I think that if we could break past the 400 area, we could be looking for an attempt to get to 405 and 408. And if we end up losing support at 390, we're going to be looking for that dip. Because we're holding support here and because there might be some buyers coming tomorrow, I want to note that there's a pattern that Tesla does where it likes to pump in the mornings, then dip, pump in the mornings, then dip, pump and dip, pump and dip. So that's what it's been doing at least thus far. Tesla's on a bit of a downtrend as we're rejecting off this resistance right here. So when you look at this, we have this yellow trend line of resistance. We rejected off this trend line 1, 2, 3 times. So overall, it's on a bit of a downtrend, but we're holding our 200 EMA. So I think what's going to happen tomorrow is tomorrow morning, there should be a pop tomorrow close to the 400s, if not the 405 area. We'll see if we could break this yellow trend line or not. There might be a little pop here. Then we might be getting a dip in some consolidation, at least approaching FOMC. And then FOMC and Tesla's earnings will be the big factor causing this to either eventually break this resistance and break out of the low 400s to start pushing into the 420s or above. Or we could be looking for a rug pull. If we end up losing 383, we're looking for like the 370s or below. So it could go either way. We'll see how things end up going, so watch that very, very closely, and that's going to be key for how things end up continuing. For other factors out there, we have SPY. SPY is doing a good job at breaking out. I just want to mention that if SPY ends up losing 598, we're looking for essentially 593. If we manage to break 602, we're looking for an attempt to fill the gap to about 608. I think what's going to happen is that we're in this consolidation phase, at least for now. But notice that pattern where we consolidated on Friday, then we dumped. Today, we saw the market gap down. It just consolidated for a couple of hours. Then we saw a pump at the end of the day. Well, you could argue that what's good about SPY is the fact that we held support. And this is what's making it different from like Tesla. So when you look at SPY, for example, we had this blue trend line of resistance. We rejected here, rejected many times. We finally broke through it. We came down to test it, and then we bounced. So you guys can see the blue trend line, we bounced off of this as our next support. So that's a good sign so far. We also closed above our 4-hour 50 EMA, which is another good sign. So I think what's going to likely happen is that we could be dipping right here, grabbing some liquidity. And as long as we try to hold above 600, I'm looking for an attempt for 602. We might consolidate like this before we start to push for 602. And we'll see if Jerome Powell causes this to pump or dump. We'll watch for that. But as of right now, this could try to push a little bit higher. If we end up losing the support right over here, all the way back down to 595, we're looking for a dip back down. But overall, I think that this is favoring upside to try to start filling this gap. I say that because we grab liquidity right over here and the 4-hour is showing some life. So look for some consolidation tomorrow and then maybe a push to about 602. If we could break, then I'm going to be anticipating more upside as the most likely possibility. If we can't hold 598, look for 595 just to be safe. But I think we're favoring a little bit of consolidation, maybe an attempt to bounce after this exaggerated drop that came. And we'll see if the Fed causes this bounce to be like much larger or much lower. This depends on Jerome Powell, but I do see a small pump coming just to start things off. I also say that because the QQQ is trying to hold support. So notice that the QQQ has a very similar setup. We had this blue trend line of resistance where we rejected many times. Then we finally broke through that. We came back down and now we're bouncing off it. So that's a good sign so far. But just to be clear, the QQQ is in a critical place. If we're bearish, you want to see the QQQ essentially lose 509. If that fails us, we could be dipping to like 505 or below. If we hold the support, we could be trying to break past like 518. If that breaks, we could be pushing into like the 520s. But just keep that in mind. That's what's likely going on, at least thus far. I think what's going to likely happen is that we could be pushing to this resistance at 518. We'll have to see if we could break past that or not. If we do, we could start filling this gap into the 520s. What I anticipate is that this is going to most likely consolidate like this. And then we could eventually try to push for like the 520s, which is where this resistance happens to be, at least going into FOMC. Now, will Jerome Powell pump us even more to fill this gap or above, or will we get this big rug pull? That depends. But as of right now, I think that that's going to be the most likely possibility. A little bit of a consolidation phase before it tries to push a little higher. I think that could happen because of Nvda and Aapl. Once I show you guys the charts, it's going to make a lot more sense. The Russell's very flat right now. We have support at 225 and resistance at 227. If we break 227, we're looking for 230. If we lose 225, we're looking for a dip to about this gap fill for the low 224s. We're very flat right now, so I'm going to give this some time to develop. It's not really doing a whole lot off this double top. ES has the same setup as SPY and the others. We had this resistance rejected many times. We broke through this. Now we're trying to retest it. So it's a good sign so far. It's very simple. If you could hold above 60.75, I'm looking for this thing to attempt to push to the 6100s. So break this green resistance. I think we push to where this gap fill happens to be right back up. If we end up losing support right over here, we're looking for essentially 60.20 flat. If that fails us, we could be dipping to lower levels below 6,000. So we're stuck in the middle, but I am favoring this is going to try to rebound just a bit. So watch and see if you break past 60.80 in these higher levels just to be safe. I favor that a little bit more, at least for ES, so give this the time it needs. For NQ, if NQ is holding support, we'll watch and see how things end up going from here. As you guys could tell, we are rejecting off this resistance. We have a rejection that keeps on happening. We're trying to break this resistance, and then we dip to where this support happens to be right here before some buyers try to return. So it's a good sign. If we're bearish on NQ, you want to see it lose this blue trend line of support at 21,000. This could lead to a lot more downside into like the 20,000 area. If we hold this trend line of support, we could be trying to push back up towards about 21,500 or above, especially as we have this gap to fill. So I think there's a good chance we try to rebound. Overall, we're showing some signs of life here. The 4-hour is building some strength, and we're trying to hold our 4-hour time frame. So it's going to be pushing for the 21,500 area or above. For Bitcoin, Bitcoin's also looking a little bit more bullish. We have 103,000 star resistance. If that breaks, we're looking for an attempt to get back up to 105,000. If we end up losing support at 99,900, we could be dipping, but I'm favoring this is going to try to bounce here. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. We have this resistance here, so it could be dipping first before it tries to bounce. So we'll see if that ends up being the case or not. So watch that like very, very closely. For others out there, and the reason why I'm saying that the market may attempt to bounce is because of what I'm seeing on Nvda, Apple, and many big tech stocks. So unfortunately, Nvda got this massive dump all the way down to about 17%. But notice that when you go back on the chart, there's this liquidity zone between 120 and 117. It goes all the way down to about the 114s. So if Nvidia loses 117, we could be at risk of dipping to like 114, if not all the way down closer to like 110. If we do lose support. But I'm hoping that we try to hold 117. We'll see if that ends up being the case. Today we saw buyers defend it, and Nvidia tried to hold 117 to 120. If it manages to hold this, we could consolidate and then see an attempt to rebound for like 125. If that's the case, I think that Nvidia is going to be in a very, very good place. So we'll see if that ends up being the case or not. So just keep that in mind. As far as Tesla goes, I want to mention that once again, like if Tesla could hold this support, especially at our 200 EMA, there could be a small rebound in the morning. We're going to be looking for a test of the 400s, if not 405, very close to these EMAs tomorrow morning. And then we'll see if Tesla could hold. I'm hoping we get a slight green day tomorrow before we see earnings and Jerome Powell's speech at FOMC. So watch for a little rebound tomorrow morning, by the way. I'm seeing Nvidia doing something very similar if we could hold support. What else is good for the markets is Aapl. So Aapl has a nice double bottom right here, a bullish divergence. If we break 230, we're looking for an attempt to push up for about 235, especially as we have that 200 EMA above. But if we lose 226, we could be looking for a dump back down to about 221. If 230 breaks, we're looking for an attempt to push higher. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. And then we could be looking for higher levels. So watch and see if that ends up developing. So that is looking pretty good, especially if we break 230, that can help the market push more. On Netflix, we have a wedge that's forming, so I think it's just going to get tighter as it consolidates. We'll be watching for a big break in one of these directions. FOMC and Jerome Powell could be the factor that causes us to like break in one of these directions, so we'll see. But for now, I just see some consolidation in this range. For MSTR, I'm seeing something very similar. This also happens to have an inverse head and shoulders like pattern. If you guys look at this, we have like a left shoulder here, a head and then a right shoulder. If we make higher lows here, we could be pushing back up to about the 360s. So we'll see if we end up seeing buyers return. I want to see if we could try to hold above 340. If that's the case, we're looking for an attempt to push to about 360. So we're making higher lows here, and this could be pushing for 360. So watch and see if that ends up being the case. For Celsius or CELH, I think there's a good chance that we try to break past 25.77. If that breaks, we're looking for 26.5. If this fails us, we're looking for essentially 25 to continue to cause a dip. So we're trying to get bought back up here. If we break 25.7, we're going to be attempting to go up to about 26.5. I think there's a good chance we try to do this. So watch and see if that ends up being the case. For Supermicro, we have something else that's developing. What's very good about this chart is we're trying to hold 29. So I think we're doing a good job right here. If that fails us, we're going to be dipping all the way down to about the 27.8 area. As long as we hold 29 tomorrow, I'm going to be looking for this thing to reclaim the 30s. I think there's a good chance it's going to try to do that. So we'll see if that ends up being the case. But I hope that we hold 29 to push for the 30s. Palantir has a nice setup. So what happened was we got this gap down. We saw this wick form here, which is a good sign of liquidity being grabbed. And then we held our 50 EMA very, very nicely. So a good sign so far. We have resistance at 75.6 and also at the 76.5-ish area. If we could break this zone, I think that there's a good chance we try to push to where this resistance is around the 79s. If we end up losing 73.97, though, we could be dipping lower. But I think there's a good chance we try to push to fill this gap all the way back up towards 80s. There's a good chance it tries to bounce here. Keep that in mind. For Rivian, we are on a bit of a downtrend. We're trying to hold support very, very nicely. If we break past 13.13, we're looking for 13.4 as our resistance. If we end up losing 12.5, we could be dipping lower. I think we might be dipping to the low 12s before we see some buyers return. So watch to see if that ends up being the case. For SoFi, we have a double top right here. This has this big, drop that came after earnings. This could be a little exaggerated. If we reclaim 16.39, I'm looking for a push to 17. If we end up losing 15.5, I'm looking for a dip back down to 15 flat. I'm favoring upside a little bit more on this. It's going to try to recover a bit. So we'll see if that ends up being the case or not. For AMD, we have a nice double bottom like structure. If we end up losing support at 114, we could be dipping lower. And as long as we break past 117, we're looking for an attempt to get closer to about 119. So I'm hoping that this is forming a double bottom. As long as we could try to hold this support, I'm looking for that bounce. We have a nice setup. I hope we get the bounce. It depends on how we end up opening tomorrow. And that could actually be more positive, at least for tech. On ARM, we're range bound right here. We have 152 as resistance. If that breaks, we look for 157. If we lose 143, we turn more bearish. Otherwise, we're just trading sideways. This is favoring and might try to rebound for 152. I do hope that ends up being the case. Coin has a good setup. we have this wick forming right here. As long as we hold above 274, we're looking for an attempt to break to about 283, then eventually 288. So I think there's a good chance we try to rebound like this, and we'll see what kind of reaction we get. But I think this is favoring upside a little bit more if we can break this resistance. For Amazon, if we end up losing 235 and 233, we could be tipping a little bit lower for 228. As long as we're above 235, we favor upside. We got a very nice close on Amazon because it dumped really hard all the way down to about its 200 EMA, all the way down to 219. And what happened? The buyers came and they pumped it right back up. So that's a good sign of strength by Amazon. When you zoom out, it's consistently making higher highs and higher lows. And we have kind of like a cup and handle setup. So it looks bullish. It looks like Amazon could be going for 238 very soon. And this could help tech try to rebound. Meta looks pretty good. Same thing happened to Meta, right? Despite the news that came out involving this AI news, we have a nice accumulation structure. What's good about Meta is that we gapped down, we dumped all the way down to 605. What happens? The buyers return and they pump it right back up. Right back up. It's slingshot right back up. They pulled it back. They pulled the slingshot back, and it just went once again right back up to all-time highs. So you guys can see Meta is very strong, and it looks like it could continue to go for about the 670s, approaching its earnings. It also depends on Jerome Powell and FOMC, but for now we remain bullish, approaching that. Microsoft, same thing, right? Big tech got a big rejection, and once again, they pulled back the rubber band, and this thing pushed right back up. So if we could break 436, we're looking for 440. If that breaks us, we're going to fill this gap back up to about 443. If we end up losing 432 and 430, we could be tipping a little bit more. But I think there's a good chance this tries to break out a little bit higher. I think there's a very, very good chance that we try to break this resistance at like 436, and I think we could try to fill this gap above. As long as we hold above that resistance, I think there's a good chance we continue to push. Google has been a little bit lackluster compared to like Microsoft and Meta. I want to see it hold 192.5 at the very least to try to bounce for 196. And if 192 starts breaking, we could be tipping to 190. I hope we get a little rebound up to about 196, so we'll see how it goes. GameStop's on a bit of a downtrend. We'll have to see if we could try to hold above 27. If not, we could be tipping to about 26 flat. AMC is a little bit weak here. We're barely holding support around 3.2, so we'll see if that holds or not. If it does, we could try to bounce a little bit. DJT is bearish. It's been bearish since Trump's inauguration. It could fall a little bit more. I want to see if this could try to base, and there's no sign yet. We're going to be watching support around the 28.5 area, then eventually like 26. So we'll see if we get those buyers to return. The VIX is rejecting here. We have this big gap below to fill. If we end up losing support around 17.5, we could be tipping back down to about 16.5 as well. If we lose like 16.5, I do expect this to dip more, and that could be a bullish signal for the markets. We have a big gap to fill. If the VIX does start dumping, that's a good sign for the bulls. And that may depend on Jerome Powell and other factors, of course. There's a head and shoulders in the 10-year, so if this starts dumping, that could be bullish for stocks. We'll see about that if yields continue to come down, depending on the Fed. And then the dollar is on a bit of a downtrend. This will also be dictated by the Fed, so we'll see what that leads to. With that being said, guys, as you guys can see, the majority of tech stocks are looking like they want to rebound a little bit. They saw a very big dump after the news came out, and they want to show signs of a comeback. So I hope we get a small comeback tomorrow. I hope this helps Tesla to some extent push into the 400s. And we might see some consolidation up until FOMC on Wednesday, not to mention Tesla's very notorious earnings on Wednesday as well after market close. With that being said, guys, I thank you all so much for listening. Have a good rest of your day. I'll be back tomorrow before market open for another update. Until then, thank you for listening and peace out.